The Galactic Council chamber was silent except for the heavy sound of shallow breathing and the faint hum of lights trembling overhead. It was a place built to show power, where the rulers of star systems once stood proud and untouchable. Today, the air was different. It carried the weight of something no empire had ever felt before. Fear. The lights flickered across the faces of thousands of alien delegates, each one carrying the same hollow look, the same pale expression. Their robes of gold, silver, and crystal shimmered weakly, but the shine did not hide their fear. These were the rulers of the galaxy, but now they looked like prisoners waiting for judgment. Behind them, stretching across the vast walls of the chamber, a massive hologram of Earth burned bright. It wasn't the peaceful blue and green world they once mocked. It stood wrapped in a dark swarm of black warships, countless in number, moving through space like a living shadow. These ships didn't broadcast messages, they didn't announce their power, they simply waited. Every star system they passed through went quiet. Every defense fleet that tried to resist vanished like smoke. The galaxy had grown used to war, but this was not war. This was something worse. It was silence. At the center of the chamber, the Speaker of the Council, once the most powerful voice in the stars, stood on shaking legs. His golden crown of light had slipped down his forehead. His voice trembled as he spoke, but the words broke apart like sand. We ask for mercy, he whispered at first, but his voice grew louder, desperate, echoing through the hall. We beg, humanity, please, stop. No one interrupted. No one mocked him. No one dared to. Every delegate stared at the glowing image of Earth as if looking into the eyes of something ancient and unstoppable. Some pressed their hands together in prayer. Others lowered their heads to the ground. It wasn't just fear of war. It was fear of the unknown. Humanity had not sent diplomats. They had not sent messages. They had not answered the Council's surrender. The human fleets just waited in the cold, black sea of space, silent like a storm that had already decided the fate of everything. The speaker fell to his knees, the sound of metal striking the marble floor echoing across the vast chamber. His ceremonial cloak spread like a broken wing behind him. He raised his hands toward the hologram, his voice cracking as he cried out. We know what we did. We cannot undo it. But please, give us mercy. It was a sight no one had imagined. The leader of the most powerful alliance in the galaxy, kneeling, begging to a planet they once treated like dust beneath their feet. The delegates who used to rule with pride now looked at one another with hopeless eyes. No one spoke. No one dared move. It was as if the entire universe held its breath. Outside, orbiting the edge of Council space, the human fleet waited. Thousands of ships stood perfectly still, like a wall of darkness stretching beyond the stars. There were dreadnoughts so massive they blocked starlight, cruisers that hovered with blades of light ready to strike, and smaller ships gliding silently like predators around a wounded prey. They did not fire. They did not move. But their presence was enough to freeze every living being that saw them. The Council's warships had tried to form a line, but they had already lowered their shields. There was no point in fighting what could not be stopped. A young alien ambassador sitting near the front row clenched his trembling hands as tears rolled down his cheeks. He remembered the first day humanity was mocked. He remembered the laughter in this very chamber when someone said humans were too quiet, too small, too emotional to rule anything. Now the laughter was gone. Those same delegates were praying to the very species they once called weak. The sound of the speaker's begging voice echoed like thunder in their hearts. We beg you. Let us live. We surrender everything. Every ship. Every world. Every power. Just spare us. His words cracked again and again, breaking the last pieces of pride left in the hall. High above the chamber, through the clear dome of glass, the Black Fleet could be seen approaching. Their shadows slid across the stars like a tide of darkness swallowing everything. A single giant dreadnought appeared from the void, its size larger than anything the Council had ever built. Its dark surface reflected no light, its engines were silent, its weapons gleamed with cold precision. No words came from it. No warning lights blinked. It simply arrived, and every heartbeat inside the chamber grew heavier. Delegates covered their ears, not because of noise, but because of the silence. It was too heavy, too alive. The speaker pressed his forehead to the ground, his golden crown clattering away. His voice broke into sobs. "Please, humanity, forgive us." Some delegates began to cry. Others screamed quietly into their robes, their pride shattering like glass. A cold breeze flowed through the hall as if the universe itself was listening. They knew humanity could wipe them out in a single moment. And what made it worse was not knowing what humanity would choose. Mercy, or something far darker. The dreadnought stopped just outside the chamber's orbit. A faint light shimmered on its hull, like the slow opening of an eye. The council chamber dimmed. A single sound broke through the silence, a deep, steady pulse, like a heartbeat. 1, 2, 3. The aliens froze. No one knew if it was a warning or a countdown. The speaker raised his head, tears flooding his eyes, his voice shaking as he whispered, "Please." The pulse continued. Slow, heavy, final. It was the sound of power the galaxy had never known before. It was the sound of something that did not need to shout to be heard. The council begged, but the galaxy already knew. It might be too late. Mercy was a hope fading in the dark. The silence of humanity spoke louder than any threat ever could. Every empire, every world, every heart listening beyond the chamber understood in that moment. What comes next would change everything. And in that heavy silence, the universe waited long before the council's desperate plea. The galaxy had laughed. They had stood in this same chamber with their golden banners raised high, their voices dripping with arrogance, mocking the idea that humans could ever be a threat. Earth was small compared to their empires, its fleets limited, its colonies few. In their eyes, humanity was just another young species trying to survive in a dangerous galaxy. But pride has a way of blinding those who wear crowns. When the first shots were fired against a small human colony on the edge of the Pashorn Rim, no one in the council believed it would matter. A fleet of 3 alien armadas surrounded the human outpost. It was supposed to be a quick victory, a demonstration of power, a lesson to make humans kneel. Instead, it became the first night the stars went silent. The fleet entered human space with songs of war playing through the comms, mocking and confident. But after 5 minutes of transmission, everything went dark. No distress calls, no wreckage, no survivors, just silence. At first, the council believed it was a trick. They sent scouts. They never came back. A week later, a second fleet entered the system. The same thing happened. No return, no signal, no explanation. It was as if the entire force was swallowed by the void itself. The galaxy had fought wars before, but this was different. No one had ever seen an enemy fight without being seen. No one had ever watched entire fleets disappear without a sound. Rumors spread like wildfire across the stars. Some said the humans had built a weapon so powerful it erased everything without warning. Others whispered that the humans had become something else, something more dangerous than anyone imagined. And then came the message. Just 3 words appeared on every intercepted signal across multiple systems. It didn't come from a leader or a politician. It came from deep space, quiet and cold. "We remember everything." That single sentence shook the empires like a storm. Because those who attacked that colony had forgotten something humans never would. Mercy had been asked once before. They answered it with fire. And humanity had not forgotten. A month later, the skies above alien worlds changed. Stars disappeared behind black shadows as the first Terran fleets revealed themselves. No grand announcement. No diplomacy. No demand. They arrived like ghosts, their hulls darker than the void itself, their engines whispering through space like predators. Where other fleets moved with flashing lights and loud signals, the Terran fleets were silent and perfect, like blades sliding through water. The first strike came on the capital of the very empire that started the war. In a single night, their defense grid, their fleets, their communications, all of it, was erased. No explosions. No long battles. One moment the world shined. The next, it was dark. Across the galaxy, panic erupted. Empires who once mocked Earth scrambled to strengthen their defenses, but it didn't matter. The Terran strategy was something no one had ever faced. They didn't conquer. They didn't negotiate. They dismantled entire civilizations piece by piece. They cut supply lines like silk, destroyed weapon platforms before alarms even sounded, and erased entire fleets without leaving a single burning wreck. Planets went quiet. Trade routes vanished. And every time someone tried to fight, a black silhouette of a Terran dreadnought appeared over their skies, silent, waiting, unstoppable. The Council tried to act strong. They held meetings, broadcast speeches, promised to crush the humans. But those were just words meant to calm frightened hearts. Everyone knew what was happening. Whole empires that had existed for thousands of years fell within weeks. The alien lords who once ruled from their golden towers now hid underground, terrified of a fleet that didn't speak. This was not war anymore. This was precision. This was vengeance wearing the shape of steel. A small border planet called Tyrell tried to surrender early, sending a message of peace into the void. They begged humanity to spare them. The Terran fleet arrived in silence. They didn't fire. They hovered over the planet like judgment itself. Hours passed. No one moved. Then, without a single shot, every military ship around the planet lost power. Their engines shut down. Their defense stations went offline. And on every screen across the surface, a single message appeared in clean, cold letters: "We do not forget." Then the fleet vanished, leaving the world shaking in fear, knowing their fate would not be decided by their surrender, but by humanity's memory. Alien historians would later call it the Month of Ashes. Entire regions of space were wiped clean of fleets. Systems that once shined like jewels were now just quiet dots on the map. And still, no one understood how humanity was doing it. Their ships were invisible to sensors. Their movements unreadable. Their strikes faster than light itself. Some said they had evolved beyond war. Others said they had become war itself. Either way, everyone feared the same thing: they could be next. Every empire that had joined the original attack now faced the same terror. No amount of gold, technology, or fleets could stop what was coming. The humans were not fighting for conquest. They were fighting for something far more dangerous. They were fighting with memory. Each strike was not random. Each world targeted was connected to what had been done to that first colony. The humans had a list. And they were crossing names off it one by one. The Galactic Council chamber, which once echoed with the sounds of laughter and arrogant speeches, had turned into a place of whispers and fear. Every delegate avoided meeting the other's eyes. No one wanted to be the next empire on the list. No one wanted to face the Black Fleet. Reports from the front were terrifying. Some fleets never even saw the enemy before they were destroyed. Others saw only one ship. One. And that was enough to end everything. One commander who survived a human attack was pulled from the wreckage of his flagship. His eyes were wide, his voice broken. He whispered to the medics, "They didn't fight like us. They didn't fire first. They waited for us to move." Then, everything disappeared. That message spread through the stars like fire. No empire was safe. No planet was untouchable. Humanity had turned the galaxy's arrogance into its greatest fear. And slowly, one by one, the mighty empires of the Council began to fall. The galaxy that once laughed at Earth now whispered Earth's name like a curse. The Black Fleets had become the nightmare hiding in every star system. And as the Council's power began to crumble, one truth spread like a shadow across the stars. Humanity had not just returned fire. Humanity had come to collect. And they would not stop until the galaxy remembered what it had done. The Council Hall, once the heart of power in the galaxy, now felt more like a tomb. The vast chamber that used to echo with the sounds of arrogant voices, sharp debates, and endless speeches had turned silent. Banners that represented proud empires hung like shadows on the cold walls. Their colors no longer burned bright. They looked faded under the dim lights that flickered like dying stars. Rows of alien delegates sat frozen in their seats, some with trembling hands, some with heads lowered in shame. Every corner of the hall carried the weight of fear. These were the same leaders who once ruled over millions of worlds, who once mocked humanity as small, weak, and naive. Now they were not rulers. They were prey. At the center of the chamber stood the grand table, a circular platform that once hosted fierce arguments over how to shape the galaxy. Now it was surrounded by terrified faces. Holograms of star maps hovered over it, blinking with red marks. Every blinking dot on the map was a system that had gone silent. Once those red lights were enemy territory. Now they were ghost zones, places where the human fleets had struck and left nothing but silence. An aide whispered into the ear of a delegate from the Dreth Empire, and his skin turned pale blue. Another system has fallen, the aide said in a shaking voice. No survivors. No transmissions. The delegate lowered his head into his hands. It was the fourth Dreth system this month. The human fleets were not slowing down. They were accelerating. At the far end of the table, the Speaker of the Council sat hunched over, his ceremonial robes crumpled and stained with sweat. His crown was no longer glowing. He stared at the map with hollow eyes, listening to the reports coming in one after another. No defense held. No alliances mattered. The black fleets moved like they were reading the galaxy's every move. Their attacks were not random, they were surgical. One world, one fleet, one empire at a time. They didn't conquer planets. They erased the power behind them. The Council knew it was no longer a war they could win. This was judgment. One of the alien rulers slammed a clawed hand on the table, his voice breaking into panic. We must strike back. We cannot just wait for them to reach our homeworlds. But his words only floated in the air like a weak breeze. No one answered him. Everyone knew what he said was useless. They had tried. Every empire at the table had tried. Fleets were sent. Armies were launched. Traps were set. All of them failed. Humanity never walked into their traps. Humanity always struck where they least expected. It was like fighting a storm that saw every move before it happened. A tall delegate from the Sealer Dominion slowly stood, his voice tired. You still speak of war as if this is war. This is not war. This is punishment. They don't want to rule. They want us to feel what they felt when we burned their colony. His words hung heavy in the air, and no one dared to deny it. They all remembered the day the Council approved the attack on that human outpost. It was supposed to be a show of strength. They wanted to remind humans of their place. But they never thought the quiet species from the blue world would strike back like this. Not with fire, but with silence. And silence was far more terrifying. The speaker finally raised his trembling hand. There is only one path left, he said. His voice cracked from exhaustion. We must surrender everything. We must give them what they want before they erase what we are. Some delegates gasped, some lowered their heads, but no one disagreed. For the first time in the history of the Council, all the great powers were united, not in strength, but in fear. We will send a message to Earth, he continued, offering total surrender. All fleets, all resources, all worlds under Council control. If there is even a chance of mercy, we must take it. The room buzzed with whispers. Some were against the idea. They won't accept, one delegate muttered, his voice shaking. They don't want power. They want us to suffer. Another added, we should have shown mercy then. Now, mercy will not be given to us. A cold silence followed those words, and no one could argue. They all knew he was right. Humanity had begged once. The galaxy had answered with fire. Now the galaxy begged, and humanity stood silent. The decision was made that night. The Council assembled its most respected envoys, the finest diplomats from every major empire. They were dressed in formal robes, but there was no dignity in their movements. Their heads were bowed, their hands clenched in fear. They were not going as equals. They were going as the defeated. Their mission was simple, to send a message directly to Earth, offering unconditional surrender. Outside the chamber, through the glass dome, the stars looked different. They seemed colder, sharper. The fleet's reports glowed red across the skies. Dreadnoughts the size of moons had already formed a dark wall around Council space. They were not moving yet. They were waiting. And the waiting was worse than the attack. Because no one knew if humanity would accept the surrender, or erase them anyway. The speaker stood at the balcony, overlooking the dark horizon of space. He felt the weight of his choices crushing him. His people had laughed when humanity pleaded for peace. They had called them weak. Now he could not sleep without seeing that same silence reflected back at him through the Black Fleet. If only we had listened, he whispered to himself. If only. One by one, the envoys stepped into the communication chamber. It was a room built for power. But tonight, it was a room of begging. The lights dimmed as the transmission lines opened. Across the stars, to the quiet planet they once mocked, a signal was sent. Every word was chosen carefully, but every voice trembled. To the leaders of Earth, the speaker began. We come before you not as rulers, but as those who know their guilt. We surrender. All fleets, all worlds, all power. We beg for your mercy. The transmission ended. No reply came. Not a single sound. The silence on the other end was worse than a threat. Because silence meant they were listening. But it also meant they were deciding. And humanity was known now not for speaking, but for moving without warning. The speaker's hands were shaking. Around him, delegates whispered prayers in their own languages, old forgotten words for hope. Hours passed. The council waited. The galaxy waited. On the far edges of space, where light moved slowly, the black fleets of Earth shifted formation. Thousands of ships aligned in perfect silence, like a predator tilting its head. No one could read their intent. But every delegate in the council chamber felt it deep in their bones. The humans had heard them. Whether they would show mercy or unleash the storm, no one knew. But one thing was certain. The galaxy that once thought itself invincible now held its breath for the decision of the very species they had once crushed without a thought. The hunters had become the hunted. And the council understood a truth that could no longer be denied. Humanity was not just another species. Humanity had become the judgment they feared most. The stars had always been beautiful to the council races. They saw them as glittering jewels scattered across a dark canvas, lights that belonged to them, territories they could claim, conquer, and divide. But tonight, as the council stood on the balcony of their capital station, the stars looked different. They looked broken. The Black Fleet had arrived. It came not like a storm filled with noise and fire, but like a wall of silence spreading across the night. A darkness so vast it swallowed the stars one by one. First, the outer markers on the edge of the system vanished behind it. Then the defense satellites. Then the light itself seemed to bend, pulled into the shadows of the Terran war machines. The council delegates stood frozen as the fleet emerged from the void. Thousands upon thousands of human ships glided forward in perfect formation, every movement precise, like blades cutting through silk. At the front were the dreadnoughts, massive ships so large they blocked entire constellations from view. Their hulls were black as the void, smooth and cold, reflecting no light. Behind them moved lines of cruisers and destroyers, their engines silent but their presence suffocating. It was not a fleet anymore. It was a single living thing. A predator that had been hunting in silence and had finally come home to finish what was started. No music played. No message was broadcast. No flashing lights announced their arrival. The humans had no need to speak. The very sight of their fleet was a message written in fear. Every alien ship in the system, from massive defense platforms to small patrol craft, had already powered down their weapons. Even the bravest captains understood. Firing a single shot now would not be war. It would be suicide. The alien admirals inside the defense command bunker whispered to each other in panic, but their voices were small, meaningless compared to the presence outside their windows. The dreadnoughts didn't stop at the border of council space. They advanced slowly, deliberately, like an executioner walking toward the condemned. One of the council's military commanders slammed his hand against the console, his voice cracking. They are surrounding us. All of them. They're not leaving a single corridor open. His words echoed through the control room, but no one responded. The tactical displays confirmed what everyone already saw with their eyes. The Terran fleet had surrounded the capital system completely. Above, below, behind, every direction was covered. It was a cage. a black cage made of steel and silence. In the council chamber, the speaker struggled to keep his voice calm as he addressed the others. "They are giving us a message," he said quietly. "This is not a siege. This is a warning." A delegate from the northern sectors whispered, "A warning of what?" No one answered. They already knew the answer. It wasn't a warning. It was judgment. Humanity had not come to talk. Humanity had come to decide. From orbit, the fleet began to shift. The dreadnoughts at the front opened their flanks, revealing even larger warships hidden in their shadow. Motherships so massive their hulls looked like floating continents. Every surface bristled with weaponry, but none of it was active. The guns were cold. The silence made it worse. If they had shouted, fired, demanded surrender, it would have been something familiar. But silence was something no empire in the galaxy knew how to fight. Far below the station, the civilian worlds of the council capital could see the black ships like an eclipse swallowing the sun. Children hid under their beds. Soldiers abandoned their posts. Whole cities stared at the sky and understood their place in the new order. Broadcast networks picked up the sight, showing it live across the galaxy. Billions of eyes watched in horror as the greatest empire ever built was surrounded in less than an hour. The humans didn't even need to fight. Their presence was enough to crush hope. In the council's military headquarters, someone whispered, "How can they be so quiet?" A scientist answered with shaking hands. "Because they don't need to shout." One admiral began to cry, the sound breaking the silence of the room. He had spent his whole life believing their fleets were the strongest in the galaxy. But now he realized strength was not in numbers. It was in fear. And humanity owned fear. As the fleet drew closer, their hulls caught the light of the distant stars and reflected nothing. They were void given form. The speaker stepped toward the massive viewing window and pressed his trembling hand against the glass. He could see them now. Thousands of ships moving like the tide. "We are standing," he whispered, "at the end of everything we built." An alarm went off in the defense network, a warning not of an attack, but of detection. The humans had sent no message, but their ships were aligning in perfect formation. It looked like the slow turning of a blade before a strike. Their dreadnoughts formed a line across the planetary plane, their wings of cruisers tightening the circle. Dozens of alien generals barked orders into their comms, but no one had anything to fight with. Their fleets were already surrounded, their stations already locked. Even if they wanted to resist, they couldn't. Humanity had already won without firing a single shot. Back in the council chamber, panic began to spread like a wave. Some delegates fell to their knees, praying in their own languages, whispering to gods who had abandoned them. Others screamed at each other, blaming past decisions. "We should have never attacked them," one shouted. "We should have listened," another roared. But it was too late. The past could not be erased. The galaxy was paying the price for its arrogance. Then, without warning, the entire system dimmed. Power grids flickered. Communication towers shut down. Defense networks went silent. The Terran fleet had activated something. Every system connected to the Council's military infrastructure shut off at once. It was like watching an entire civilization have its heart ripped out in a single moment. The silence became unbearable. The speaker fell back into his chair, his hands over his face. "It's over," he whispered. No one argued. There was no fight left in them. No words could undo what was done. They all stared at the giant holographic display of the system as their fleets blinked offline one by one. The human fleet was still silent, still waiting, and that was what terrified them most. On the main viewing window, the largest human dreadnought finally came into full view. It was larger than the Council's entire defense station. The hull bore no name, no flag, no mark. Just black steel and endless power. The lights of the Council capital reflected off its surface and died like candles in a storm. Every alien in the room felt their breath catch. One ship. Just one ship. And it was enough to silence an entire empire. And then it happened. A single, deep pulse echoed through space. It was low, steady, and felt more like a heartbeat than a sound. One pulse. 2. 3. The dreadnought's engines glowed faintly, like an eye opening in the dark. The pulse reached every station, every world in the system. It was not a weapon. It was a message. Not spoken in any language. Just presence. Cold, calm, final. The speaker stood on weak legs, his voice barely a whisper. They're not here to negotiate. The fleet continued to advance. No fire. No chaos. Just the crushing weight of silence and power. It was the march of something greater than war. The galaxy had fought wars before. But this was different. This was the moment every empire learned the truth they had ignored for too long. Humanity does not shout. Humanity does not beg. Humanity waits. And when it moves, the stars themselves tremble. As the Black Fleet closed the circle around the Council homeworld, the lights inside the chamber flickered once again. The alien delegates stared at one another, their hands shaking, their breaths short. They had begged for mercy. They had offered surrender. But the humans had not answered. And in the silence of that endless night, the galaxy finally understood what it meant to be truly powerless. Inside the council chamber, the silence was no longer just silence. It was a weight crushing every soul in the room. The walls, built of silver stone and glowing crystals, once made to reflect the power of the galaxy's rulers, now felt cold and small. The massive holographic map of the system blinked weakly, showing the Black Fleet's complete control of space. Every escape route, every hidden corridor, every path the Council could have used was gone. There was nowhere left to run. No one spoke. They all felt it. The storm had arrived, and the only thing left to discover was how it would break them. The speaker sat slumped in his chair, his ceremonial robes dragging on the polished floor. His hands shook as he held the comm crystal that connected to the human fleet. Hours had passed since their message of surrender was sent, and no response had come. Not a single sound. Not even static. It was as if the humans had erased the meaning of time itself, forcing their enemies to wait inside their own fear. The delegates around him had stopped pretending to be leaders. Some were crying softly, heads bowed, their hands clenched tightly. Others stared blankly at the ceiling as if trying to imagine a world where they could escape this nightmare. But no one moved. They all waited. Far beyond the walls of the chamber, the Black Fleet remained motionless. Thousands of Terran dreadnoughts and cruisers floated like silent predators. They didn't need to shout or threaten. Their existence alone was enough to choke the galaxy's greatest empire. The alien defense fleets, still orbiting the capital, were fully powered down. Their captains didn't need orders. They understood. There was no fighting the storm. There was only surviving it. If survival was even something humanity would allow. The door to the chamber opened, and a young aide rushed in, his breath shaking, his eyes wide. "We've received a signal," he whispered. Every head snapped toward him. The room, thick with despair, suddenly burned with a new kind of tension. "Is it them?" the speaker asked, his voice dry and rough. The aide nodded. "It's coming from the flagship of the human fleet." The chamber fell even quieter, as if the air itself had frozen. For hours they had waited for this moment, but now that it had come, none of them felt relief. They felt only fear. The speaker stood, his legs unsteady, and walked to the center of the hall where the transmission platform waited. The platform had once been used to make grand speeches to the galaxy. Now it was a stage for begging. He raised his hand, and the signal was connected. A shimmering light formed in the air above the platform. It wasn't a complicated message. It wasn't a speech. It was just a single image. A Terran soldier standing on the bridge of the flagship. He was dressed in dark combat armor, the human insignia carved into his chest plate. His helmet was off. His face was calm. Too calm. There was no hatred in his eyes, no anger. Only cold, quiet control. For a long moment, he said nothing. His gaze moved across the room, as if he could see every trembling delegate through the transmission. The silence stretched, growing heavier with every heartbeat. Finally, he spoke, and his voice was steady, smooth, like the edge of a blade. "Mercy was asked once," he said. His words echoed through the chamber like a distant thunder. "And you answered with fire." A shiver ran through the council. You burned our colony, he continued. You laughed as our people begged. You said humanity would learn its place. And we did. His eyes narrowed slightly. We learned where you stand when someone is weak. The speaker stepped forward, his knees trembling. Please, he whispered. We have surrendered. We give you everything. Our fleets, our resources, our worlds. We beg you to spare us. His voice broke at the last word. The human soldier didn't react. He didn't smile. He didn't raise his voice. He simply watched them like a shadow judging the guilty. You think surrender erases the past? He asked softly. You think words can clean blood that never stopped burning? His voice stayed calm, but it carried more weight than any threat. Every delegate lowered their eyes to the floor, unable to meet his gaze. He stepped closer to the transmission device on his end, his image growing sharper in the council chamber. You didn't fear us then. You will fear us now. Because this is not war. This is memory. A cold silence followed his words, colder than the void itself. For the first time in centuries, none of the empires spoke back. No one argued. No one tried to act strong. The mighty council that once decided the fate of entire galaxies now stood silent before one man. The soldier looked away for a brief second, and behind him, the bridge of the dreadnought came into view. Through the massive window, thousands of black ships floated like a steel tide around the council homeworld. It wasn't a fleet anymore. It was an executioner's blade hanging over their necks. He turned back to the camera. When you destroyed our colony, you took something from us, he said. You took peace. You took mercy. You took trust. His voice lowered, and every delegate leaned forward, terrified of what would come next. Now, we take from you. The speaker dropped to his knees, tears streaming down his face. Please, he begged. We have families, children, people who had nothing to do with this war. Show mercy. A few delegates joined him, crying out in broken voices, repeating the same word, mercy, mercy, mercy. But the soldier's face didn't change. Mercy, he said slowly, as if tasting the word. We begged for mercy once. And your answer was silence. This is our answer. The transmission ended with a single pulse of light. No threat. No timeline. No demands. Just silence again. The council chamber erupted in panic. Some delegates screamed. Others collapsed in tears. A few tried to run, as if they could escape the judgment orbiting their skies. But they all knew there was nowhere to go. Outside, the human fleet began to move. Not in chaos, not in anger, but in perfect, terrifying precision. Across the galaxy, every broadcast channel went live without warning. Every world, every empire, every city saw the same thing. The Black Fleet shifting into strike formation. From orbit, the Terran dreadnoughts expanded their wings, their weapons locking onto every major target. The entire system was trapped in a web of invisible fire. A tremor ran through the ground as planetary shields were disabled remotely, one after another, like dominoes falling. Not a single alien soldier dared to resist. The speaker clutched the floor, whispering to himself, "They will end us. They will end everything." And in that moment, the galaxy knew. Humanity's response was not coming as speeches or demands. It was coming as the storm they had awakened. A storm born from memory. A storm that had no mercy. The Terran flagship drifted into position, its shadow falling over the council capital like night swallowing the sun. Every alien looked to the sky, and what they saw was not an army. It was justice, the kind that never forgets, the kind that doesn't bargain, the kind that answers silence with silence. Humanity was ready, and the galaxy held its breath, knowing the final judgment was seconds away. The night that followed would never be forgotten. Across the council capital, across every surviving world under their banner, the sky itself seemed to freeze. The Terran dreadnoughts held their position above the planet, their black hulls blotting out entire star fields, turning daylight into a false dusk. Every city, every base, every military station could see the massive ships hanging over them like judgment carved into steel. The people watched in silence, their hearts beating faster with every second that passed. And still, not a single human word was spoken. It was as if humanity had wrapped the galaxy in silence and forced it to listen. Inside the council chamber, the speaker lay on the cold floor, his hands gripping the edge of the polished stone. His face was streaked with sweat and tears. All around him, delegates were whispering prayers in their different languages. Some were sobbing, others staring into nothing, their minds already broken by fear. The silence was worse than any weapon. It was slow, heavy, alive. They had seen wars before, loud, brutal wars. But this was something else. This was power that didn't need to scream. It only needed to exist. The massive dreadnought at the front of the Terran fleet began to move. Slowly, gracefully, like a giant predator circling prey that had already stopped fighting. Smaller cruisers peeled away from the formation and slid into lower orbit. On the ground, the alien cities shook as the shadows of these ships passed overhead, swallowing everything in their darkness. Screens and monitors across the system lit up all at once. Every world that had once belonged to the Council now saw the same image. The Terran flagship, looming like the end of all things. Then, finally, the silence was broken. A deep, steady voice echoed through every channel, calm and cold. It was the same Terran soldier who had spoken before. "We remember," he said. Just 2 words. No rage, no hatred. Only the sharp finality of a truth that had been carved into history. Those 2 words spread across the galaxy like fire. Empires that once mocked humanity fell silent. Pirates, merchants, soldiers, everyone froze. Those 2 words were not a threat. They were a verdict. In orbit, the fleet opened its wings. Dreadnoughts turned in unison, their weapons locking onto orbital stations, military command nodes, and planetary defense grids. They did not fire immediately. They waited, letting every alien heart feel what it meant to be truly powerless. The speaker raised his head slowly, his lips trembling. This is the end," he whispered. Delegates clung to each other as if that would protect them from what was coming. Some screamed into their comms, begging for mercy, sending desperate messages into the void. But everyone knew humanity wasn't listening anymore. Humanity was remembering. Then came the light. A single pulse flashed across the sky as the lead dreadnought fired, not at the cities, not at civilians, but at the Council's central military core. It was a clean, perfect strike, so precise it didn't shake the ground. It simply erased the target from existence. The structure that once commanded fleets across 1,000 systems disappeared into a cloud of glowing dust. 1 heartbeat later, orbital defense networks collapsed. A second pulse followed, destroying shipyards, command towers, and all war assets tied to the Council's power. The message was clear. Humanity wasn't here to burn planets for revenge. They were here to erase the engines of war that had once burned their own. Across the galaxy, other Council worlds fell one after another without a single shot fired in return. Entire fleets surrendered without resistance, their commanders refusing to fight what could not be beaten. Human dreadnoughts didn't even chase them. They simply erased their power bases and moved on, leaving the world stripped and silent. The galaxy watched, powerless, as centuries of empire vanished in hours. Inside the chamber, the speaker rose on shaking legs, clutching the edge of the table. "Why?" he whispered, his voice barely more than a breath. "Why not finish us? Why not kill us?" No one answered. But as the human fleet kept striking with careful, measured precision, the truth began to unfold. Humanity was not looking for blood. They were looking to make sure no one would ever again have the power to do to them what had been done. They were not destroying people. They were dismantling fear itself, and replacing it with their own. One by one, alien generals fell silent on the communications network as their armies laid down their weapons. Cities opened their gates, surrendering without being asked. The dreadnoughts hovered above them like silent gods, watching, waiting, ensuring no spark of resistance remained. There was no resistance because there was no hope. The Terran soldier appeared again on every screen, standing on the same silent bridge, behind him the endless fleet stretching into the void. His eyes were cold and steady. You once taught us what mercy meant to you, he said, his voice echoing across thousands of worlds. Now we teach you what it means to us. He paused, letting the words sink deep into the bones of the galaxy. We do not forget, but we choose what is remembered. His gaze hardened. Your empire ends tonight. Your history begins with us. In that single moment, the entire structure of power in the galaxy shattered. The Council was no more. Every fleet, every shipyard, every station that once belonged to the empires who had attacked Earth was now either dismantled or under Terran control. The speaker fell to his knees, his voice cracking as he whispered, "We begged for mercy too late." Around him, the delegates broke down completely. These were not rulers anymore. They were ghosts standing in the ruins of their own arrogance. But humanity did not finish them. The Terran fleet didn't burn their cities to the ground or wipe out their people. It left their world standing but stripped of power. The Council banners were torn down not with fire, but with silence. And from that silence, a new order rose, not an empire of the Council, but an empire built on the memory of what had been done. The humans did not ask for their loyalty. They simply made it clear that nothing in the galaxy would ever threaten Earth again. As dawn touched the alien capital, the dreadnoughts began to move away. The people who survived walked out of their homes and looked to the sky where the Black Fleet slowly vanished into the darkness of space. There was no cheering. There was no sound. Only the feeling that the galaxy itself had changed forever. The speaker stood alone on the balcony, watching the Terran flagship disappear. His voice cracked as he whispered to no one, "We begged for mercy, and they gave us memory." Generations would speak of that night. They would remember the silence, the shadow, and the two words that shook the stars. We remember. It was not just the end of the Council. It was the beginning of something far greater. From that night on, every empire, every planet, every voice in the galaxy would live under the memory of Earth. And no one, not even the mightiest, would ever dare raise a hand against humanity again.